On March 30th of 2020, Dr. Rodney Howard Browne was arrested for having a large gathering in the midst of the coronavirus restrictions in Florida. When this occurred, I wrote a blog post urging Christians to congregate regardless of any laws that were in place. Fellow Christians called me careless and also cited Romans 13 and said we ought to obey the government. Most of these critics were reformed in their theology. Recently, Pastor John MacArthur of Grace Unity Church announced that he would continue having services despite the laws put in place in California that limit public gatherings in the face of the Rona pandemic. Now, I have observed that many of the same people who criticized me months ago for supporting Brown's decision to keep having services are singing the praises of MacArthur. So, what gives? If MacArthur is supportive of gathering in the face of a pandemic and in the face of government restrictions, where was MacArthur when Rodney Howard Browne took a stand for Christian liberty? When Rodney Howard Browne was arrested, Dr. James White was concerned about the apparent apathy of his Reformed brethren and offered this insight.
So I'm very concerned that there have been many Christians who have just sort of laughed this off like, well, Rodney Howard Browne, who cares? And Rodney Howard Browne is into conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And so you have this idea that, well, they may come after Rodney Howard Browne. I mean, he's got a charismatic megachurch, but he's way off in the bushes.
Though some Reformed people will not accept MacArthur as Reformed, it is clear that, by and large, MacArthur not only regularly engages with the Reformed community by attending their events, but many Reformed people love him. I know of many Presbyterians and Reformed Baptists that have copies of MacArthur's commentaries on their bookshelves. Clearly, this is a case of a form of clanism. Since MacArthur is someone who is respected and revered by the Reformed community, many of these community members are praising MacArthur for doing what Browne did months ago. John MacArthur, who is now being celebrated for his boldness, was one of the theologians who I was surprised to see remain silent while Browne fought for liberty for Christians all over the United States. This was a battle that Dr. Browne, by his obedience to God, was able to win. Isn't it odd how Word of Faith charismatics are often criticized for being apathetic toward doctrine, yet the one of the few people to take a stand for churches everywhere was a Word of Faith pastor? Let us also keep in mind that this is a battle that Browne has already won. When Dr. Browne took his stand, there was no backing from Attorney General Bill Barr, nor had any well-known pastor, although there were other pastors who took a stand as well, many of which, by the way, were charismatic in their theology, had taken a stand against restrictive ordinances that impacted the church's ability to gather. By the time MacArthur stood up against California, Attorney General Bill Barr had already announced his intention to support the church's right to gather, and Browne had already been issued an apology by the sheriff who was responsible for his arrest. Therefore, I ask this question: if the church's right to assemble is so important, why didn't John MacArthur speak out when this was such a hot-button issue for our country? Why is it, for all of MacArthur's talk about boldly standing up for the gospel, he didn't support leaders like Dr. Rodney Howard Browne, who successfully fought for the church's right to gather? I had the privilege of attending one of Dr. Browne's services in Tampa, Florida, a couple of weeks before he was arrested. They followed social distancing protocols, they had cleaners sanitizing, and the church had expensive air purifying machines, like those that are used in hospitals. I have not heard of Grace Unity Church taking such precautions, so why aren't the same Christians who called Browne foolish for organizing church services criticizing MacArthur for being reckless for organizing services during a pandemic? In conclusion, there's a very apparent hypocrisy among many of those in the Reformed camp who are supporting MacArthur while calling Browne foolish. I am thankful that some Reformed Christians, such as Dr. James White, had the discernment to understand that this is a problem among the Reformed community. The Reformed community, if it wishes to operate as it ought, must relinquish its clanism and join itself together with the rest of the body of Christ. Just because there are disagreements does not mean that we should not have concern for one another. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 24 to 27, "For our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to that part which lacked, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular."